It was a gray morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The kind that made the city's cobblestone streets look older and the air heavier with secrets. The courthouse buzzed quietly as lawyers and clerks hurried through the marble halls. But one figure stood apart from the crowd, Claire Matthews. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, her heels clicking with precision against the polished floor, Claire carried an air of confidence that both intimidated and intrigued everyone around her. To the legal community, she was a force of nature, sharp, cold, and unshakable. Her clients called her the Woman in Black, a nickname that began as a comment on her wardrobe but evolved into something almost mythical. Claire had made a name for herself defending clients most lawyers wouldn't dare touch. Men accused of murder, fraud, or corruption. She was brilliant in her arguments, ruthless in her strategy, and merciless in her cross-examinations. Prosecutors dreaded facing her. Judges respected her. She was, by all accounts, unstoppable. But those who worked closest with Claire knew there was more behind her calm exterior. They saw the faint tremor in her hand when she reached for her coffee, the long nights when her office light stayed on long after everyone else had gone home. They noticed how she avoided personal questions, how she brushed off conversations about her life outside the courtroom. The truth was, Claire Matthews was alone. She had been for a long time. 5 years earlier, her marriage had ended in a quiet, bitter divorce. Her ex-husband, a corporate attorney in Atlanta, had left her after years of tension and emotional distance. There were no children to fight over, no dramatic courtroom scenes. Just silence and a signature. Since then, Claire had buried herself in work, using her cases to fill the void she refused to acknowledge. At 36, she was successful, beautiful, and utterly miserable. Her life followed a rigid rhythm. Wake up at 5 a.m., run along the Battery, shower, coffee, court, casework, wine, sleep. Every day the same. Every night colder than the last. It wasn't until that summer, the summer of 2019, that everything began to change. That was when Judge Robert Caldwell, one of the city's most powerful and respected judges, approached her after a trial. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the empty courtroom. "I have a favor to ask. It's about my son." His son. That simple phrase would become the thread that unraveled everything. Judge Caldwell was known for his stern demeanor and moral rigidity. To the public, he was the face of justice, fair, disciplined, incorruptible. But beneath the surface, whispers circulated about his temper, his impossible standards, and his controlling nature. His wife had died when their only son, Ethan, was 10 years old, leaving the judge to raise him alone. Those who knew the Caldwells said Ethan had always been a quiet, intelligent boy, polite but restless. Now 17, he was about to start his senior year of high school, and the judge wanted to give him real-world experience before college. "He's bright," Caldwell said, "but he lacks discipline. I want him to spend the summer at your firm. Maybe you can teach him something about responsibility." Claire hesitated. She didn't take interns, let alone teenagers. But refusing a judge's request, especially Caldwell's, wasn't wise. So she agreed. "I'll keep him busy," she replied coolly. "Don't worry, Judge. I'll make sure he learns a thing or two." As she left the courtroom that afternoon, she didn't think much about it. Another summer, another favor, another name to forget by September. But fate had a strange sense of humor. In less than a month, that teenage boy, Ethan Caldwell, would walk into her office and change the course of her life forever. And by the end of that summer, one of them would be dead. The first time Ethan Caldwell walked into Claire Matthews' office, he didn't look like the son of one of South Carolina's most feared judges. He looked ordinary, dressed in an ill-fitting blue shirt, hair slightly tousled, and holding a folder that seemed too heavy for him. Ethan looked more like a nervous high schooler attending his first debate meet than a judge's son starting a legal internship. But behind that awkward smile, there was something else. A spark in his eyes that caught Claire off guard. "Ms. Matthews?" he asked, standing uncertainly in the doorway. Claire glanced up from her desk, her pen pausing mid-note. "That's me," she replied, her tone brisk. You must be Ethan. He nodded. My dad said you'd be expecting me. Yes, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Let's make this quick. I assume you've never worked in a law office before. Ethan laughed nervously. Not really. I mean, unless listening to my dad yell at lawyers counts. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt the faintest flicker of amusement. Well, she said dryly, let's hope you learn to do better than that. He smiled back, wide, genuine, and surprisingly warm. For a moment, Claire forgot that he was just 17. He spoke with a confidence beyond his years, asking questions about cases, the legal process, and how she managed to stay so composed in court. It wasn't idle curiosity. He was genuinely fascinated. Over the next few days, Ethan proved to be sharp. He caught on to case details quickly, remembered every document she mentioned, and asked insightful questions that even some of her junior associates missed. There was a hunger in him not just to learn but to understand her. Claire, who had long since stopped letting anyone get close, found herself lowering her guard bit by bit. By mid-July, the routine had changed. Ethan would arrive early, sometimes bringing her coffee. He stayed late, helping her organize files or research past rulings. He had an infectious energy that filled the quiet office with life. She caught herself looking forward to his presence. His questions, his laughter, the way his eyes lit up when she complimented his work. But there was something deeper growing beneath the surface, something neither of them dared name. Late one evening, after everyone had left, they sat side by side reviewing a complex case. Claire noticed how close he was, his shoulder brushing against hers. When she looked up, their eyes met. It wasn't the look of a boy admiring his mentor. It was something older, something dangerous. Ms. Matthews, he said softly, can I ask you something personal? Claire hesitated. That depends. He leaned forward. Why do you always wear black? She blinked, surprised. Because it's professional. He smiled faintly. No, I think it's because it makes you feel safe. For a moment, the air between them grew heavy. Claire didn't respond. She simply closed the file, her voice calm but firm. That's enough for tonight, Ethan. Go home. He stood, looking embarrassed but not apologetic. Good night, Ms. Matthews. After he left, Claire sat in silence. No one had ever looked at her that way before, not even her ex-husband. It frightened her how easily a 17-year-old boy could make her feel something she thought she'd buried long ago. In the weeks that followed, the tension between them grew unspoken but undeniable. A brush of hands when passing documents, lingering eye contact, laughter that lasted too long. One afternoon, after winning a difficult case, Ethan appeared at her door with a small gift, a silver pen. You said yours keeps running out of ink, he said shyly. She smiled, touched. Thank you, Ethan. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he replied. You deserve it. You're amazing. It was innocent. And yet, it wasn't. Claire tried to convince herself that it was harmless, that she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew what was happening. She knew she was walking toward a line that could never be uncrossed. One Friday evening, after a long day in court, she found him waiting by her car in the parking lot. Ethan, she said, startled. What are you doing here? I wanted to make sure you got home safe, he said. It's late. Ethan, you shouldn't. Before she could finish, he stepped closer. His voice was quiet, trembling. I can't stop thinking about you. Her heart pounded. You need to go home, she whispered. I know, he said, but I don't want to. And then, before she could move, he kissed her. It was brief, impulsive, and terrifyingly sincere. When it ended, Claire stood frozen. Ethan, this can't happen, she said, her voice shaking. Do you understand? This can never happen again. He looked at her with a mixture of guilt and longing. Then why didn't you stop me sooner? She didn't have an answer, because she didn't want to. That night, Claire drove home in silence, her pulse racing, her hands trembling on the wheel. She told herself it was over, that she'd set boundaries and it wouldn't go further. But deep down, She already knew she'd lost control. For the first time in years, she felt alive again, and that feeling was more intoxicating than any sense of right or wrong. She didn't know it yet, but that kiss marked the beginning of her downfall. The following week, things at the firm seemed normal. Claire kept her distance, speaking to Ethan only when necessary, her tone crisp and professional. But every time he walked past her door, she felt her composure tremble. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was curiosity mixed with guilt. He was too young, too close, and too off-limits. Still, Ethan didn't act like a typical 17-year-old. He carried himself with confidence, spoke like someone older, and had a quiet charm that made people listen. Even the senior associates liked him. But Claire noticed something others didn't. How his eyes always found her in a room. How he lingered after everyone else had gone, pretending to be finishing paperwork. One evening, while she was packing up, Ethan appeared in her doorway. "Need help?" he asked. "No," she replied, without looking up. He didn't leave. "You're different when it's just us," he said. She finally looked at him. "Different how? You're not the woman in black then. You're just Claire." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she said quietly, "You should go home, Ethan." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, but you never mean it." Her breath caught. Before she could respond, he turned and left, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. That night, Claire sat in her car long after the building lights went out. She told herself she could stop this, that she still had control. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had already started between them, something neither of them could walk away from. It wasn't love yet, but it was dangerous. And danger, as Claire would soon learn, can be addictive. What began as stolen glances soon turned into stolen nights. Started with text messages, short, cautious, and easily deniable. "Good work today. You look tired. Take care of yourself." But within days, the tone shifted. "I miss you. Can I see you tonight?" Claire knew she was crossing a line, but each time Ethan's name lit up her phone, her restraint faded a little more. He made her feel seen again, something no one had done in years. They began meeting after hours. Sometimes it was in her car, parked under a bridge where no one would notice. Sometimes it was at her apartment when the city was asleep. Their connection grew intense, reckless, and secretive. Ethan was obsessed. He'd skip classes just to be near her, leaving her flowers on her desk, sneaking into her office when others weren't around. He started calling her his escape, his reason to breathe. At first, Claire brushed it off as youthful infatuation. But soon, she realized the danger wasn't just his age. It was how deeply he needed her. One night, as they lay together in silence, Ethan whispered, "I don't want to go back home. I hate him. I hate everything except you." Claire turned to him. "Don't say that, Ethan. You have a life ahead of you." He shook his head. "Not without you." His voice was trembling, desperate. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. What had she done? The next morning, she tried to end it. She told him it was a mistake, that it had to stop. But Ethan didn't listen. His texts became constant, his visits unannounced. And then came the phone calls, anonymous, late at night. A distorted voice whispering, "End it before it ends you." Claire tried to ignore them, telling herself it was just a prank. But deep down, she knew someone had found out. The secret was no longer safe. An obsession was about to turn deadly. By late August, the walls were closing in. Claire could feel it in the way people at the firm looked at her. Too long, too curious. She heard whispers fade when she entered a room. Ethan's visits had become harder to hide, his behavior more reckless. He no longer cared about being discreet. He'd call her during work hours, show up unannounced, sometimes even wait for her outside the courthouse. And every time, Claire's anxiety deepened. She told him to stop, to think, to understand what was at stake. But Ethan was 17, ruled by emotion, not logic. "You're scared," he'd say. "You care too much about what they think." But one evening, her fear became real. Her secretary, Marla, walked into her office holding a brown envelope with no return address. "This came for you," she said casually. Inside were photos, grainy, taken from a distance. Claire's breath caught. They showed her and Ethan in her car, parked under that same bridge, his hand on hers, her face turned toward him. Her hands shook as she flipped through them. There were at least 10. Someone had been following them. That night, she called Ethan in a panic. "Did you tell anyone? Did anyone see us?" "No," he said, confused. "Why?" "Because someone knows," she whispered. "They took pictures." He swore he hadn't told a soul. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. 2 days later, Judge Caldwell summoned his son to his chambers. What happened behind those closed doors would never be officially recorded, but neighbors later said they heard shouting from the judge's house that night. The next morning, Claire received a call. A cold, calm voice she recognized instantly. "Ms. Matthews," Judge Caldwell said, "stay away from my son. If you value your career or your freedom, you'll end this immediately." Claire tried to speak, but he cut her off. "I have the photos. I know everything. Don't make me destroy you." Then the line went dead. She sat in silence, trembling, staring at her reflection in the dark window. Her double life had shattered, her secret laid bare. That night, Ethan showed up at her door, furious and tearful. "He took my phone, my laptop, everything," he said. "He said he's going to ruin you." "Ethan, please," she begged. "This has to stop." But Ethan's anger burned hotter than his fear. "If he tries to destroy you, I'll destroy him," he shouted. In that moment, Claire realized something terrifying. Ethan wasn't just a lovesick boy anymore. He was dangerous. And the line between love and obsession had finally disappeared. The night was stormy, the kind of night when the rain sounds like whispers against the window. Claire hadn't slept in 2 days. Every sound made her flinch. Every passing car made her peek through the curtains. She'd stopped going to work. The firm was buzzing with rumors, and she couldn't face the stares. Judge Caldwell had made good on his threat. Emails had been leaked, photos whispered through legal circles. Her reputation was in ruins. She was packing her things, preparing to leave town for a while, when a knock echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp taps. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, soaked, shaking, eyes wild. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she said, panic rising in her chest. "I had to see you," he said. "He told me you're leaving. Is it true?" "Ethan, please." He stepped inside, slamming the door behind him. "You can't leave me, Claire. You promised you'd never abandon me." "I never promised that," she said softly. "We both knew this couldn't last." "You don't mean that," he snapped. His voice cracked. "I gave up everything for you." Tears welled in his eyes as he pulled something from his jacket. A small kitchen knife. Claire froze. "Ethan," she whispered, "put that down." "I can't," he said, voice trembling. "If you go, I have nothing left." She tried to move closer, hands raised. "Listen to me. You're not thinking clearly." He shook his head, crying harder now. "I love you, Claire. I'd rather die than lose you." In that split second, something inside him snapped. He stepped forward, fast and unsteady. She screamed, grabbing his wrist, the knife flashing between them as they struggled. Neighbors later said they heard a single scream, followed by silence. When police arrived hours later, they found Ethan lying on the living room floor, blood pooling beneath him, his face pale and still. The knife was on the ground beside Claire, her hands covered in red, her eyes empty. "He wouldn't stop," she whispered when they asked what happened. "He said he'd rather die." The officer noted her words, but the blood told a different story. Rage, desperation, panic. Whatever happened in that apartment, it ended with a boy's death and the destruction of 2 lives. Blue and red lights flashed across the wet pavement outside Claire's apartment. The storm had eased, but the air was still heavy, thick with the scent of rain and blood. Detective Marcus Heller stepped inside, the soles of his shoes sticking slightly to the polished floor. "God!" he muttered. The living room looked like a scene from one of his worst cases. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, blood smeared across the tile. And there, in the center of it all, lay Ethan Caldwell. 17 years old, lifeless, a knife wound deep in his chest. Claire sat on the couch, trembling, her hands still stained crimson. Her black blouse was torn at the shoulder, her eyes red and distant. She didn't fight or cry. She just stared at the body. "He came at me," she whispered as the detective approached. "He had the knife. I tried to stop him. I didn't mean to." "Ms. Matthews," Heller said quietly, "we're going to need you to come with us." She nodded, barely registering the words. At the precinct, under harsh white lights, Claire gave her statement. She told the officers that Ethan had shown up uninvited, angry and unstable, that he'd pulled a knife, and she'd fought to defend herself, that everything had happened too fast. But the evidence raised questions. The knife was one from her kitchen. The cuts on Ethan's hands suggested he'd tried to block the attack, not make one. And the neighbors heard only one scream, hers. Detective Heller asked, "Was there a struggle before the stabbing?" Claire's eyes flickered. "Yes." "Then why isn't there any defensive injury on you?" She looked down. Her voice cracked. "I don't know." It was a lie and they both knew it. By morning, the news had spread. Judge's son found dead in attorney's apartment. The story exploded across Charleston. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, demanding answers. Judge Caldwell, grim-faced and silent, refused to speak to the press. Behind closed doors, he pushed for the harshest possible charges. For him, this wasn't just murder. It was humiliation. Claire was charged with second-degree murder, though her lawyers insisted on self-defense. She was granted bail, but the damage was already done. The firm suspended her, her colleagues turned away, and the city she once ruled now watched her fall. That night, she sat alone in her empty apartment, the faint outline of blood still visible on the floorboards. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, his expression frozen between love and pain. In her mind, she heard his last words echoing again and again. "I'd rather die than lose you." And in that moment, she wondered if, in some twisted way, he had gotten exactly what he wanted. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, and curious faces filled every seat. Claire sat at the defense table, pale and expressionless, as prosecutors painted her as a manipulative woman who seduced a minor and killed him when their secret was exposed. The defense claimed it was self-defense, a desperate act to survive a violent outburst from a boy consumed by obsession. Judge Caldwell recused himself, but his shadow lingered over every word. He never looked at her, not once. The jury listened to weeks of testimony, texts, photos, expert opinions. When Claire took the stand, her voice broke only once. "I tried to save him, but love turned into fear." After 3 tense days, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent. "We find the defendant, Claire Matthews, guilty of voluntary manslaughter." Gasps echoed. Claire closed her eyes, tears sliding down her face. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Judge Caldwell left the courthouse without a word, his face as unreadable as stone. Outside, reporters shouted questions no one wanted to answer. A respected lawyer had fallen. A promising boy was gone, and Charleston would never forget. In prison, Claire withdrew from everyone. She spent her days writing letters to Ethan, dozens of them. She described her guilt, her loneliness, and the dreams where he was still alive. "In another life," she wrote, "we could have just been ordinary, but we were never meant for peace." 5 years later, guards found her in her cell, silent, lifeless, a single note on her desk. "He wanted forever. Now he has it." Judge Caldwell retired soon after her death. He sold his home and disappeared from public life. The story of Claire Matthews and Ethan Caldwell became one of Charleston's darkest legends. A tale of desire, power, and the destruction that follows forbidden love. Locals still whisper that late at night, near the courthouse, a woman in black can be seen walking alone, her head bowed, as if carrying a guilt too heavy for this world.